Hey everyone, you're listening to the 805 Uncensored. We are a show on the Anti Capitalist Podcast Network hosted by three leftists. This podcast covers a variety of topics from music to politics, news, philosophy, and more. There are no limits, which is why we call ourselves Uncensored. So, welcome. Please follow us on your podcast and social media platforms of choice. This time, we're going to be doing another panel. This is our 16th panel we've done, and we're going to be discussing bird flu and climate change. Before we dive into the topics at hand, I'm going to call in each member in the panel. I'd like you just to introduce yourself. You can talk about your political background if you feel comfortable with that, your professional background, and maybe where you're located in the world. So we'll start with you, Audra.
Oh, good God. I didn't want to start. Okay. So my name is Audra, and I am an American who lives abroad. I'm over in Holland, just south of Amsterdam, in a city called Delft. And I've been here for 20 years. And I left America because I was frustrated with the way things were going. And I was just looking for health insurance that was affordable. So I came and found the American dream over here. But over the last decade, things have changed. So I connected with Jordan a couple of years ago and said, I'm not sure if you're aware, but this whole thing of what's happening in America is actually tied in globally. And we just had Brexit happen, and we need to be talking and having a lot of conversations because anytime I'm in America, I'm not seeing the same news that I'm watching across this side of the Atlantic. And that was a couple of years ago. So I'm a writer and a yoga teacher and a pet sitter, and I have a jack of all trades repertoire. So I'm here because I also write about geopolitical topics, and I am the daughter of a politician, and I am the girlfriend to a retired politician as well. So politics to me is just something that's very near and dear.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being here. It's always great to chat with you, Audra. Um,
Thanks.
you just told me how to pronounce your name. Probably gonna screw this up. Sharon? Shireen?
Is it me? It's
Yes.
Shireen.
Shireen.
Yes, like
Okay.
like serene, but with an H.
Shireen. You're up
Yeah.
next.
Awesome, guys. Shireen means sweet in Farsi. I'm Iranian. I was there until about 9, and then my family decided we didn't like being persecuted for no reason whatsoever. My direct family that was directly affected, so we ended up leaving and lived in Cyprus for a while. Uh, had some issues there with trying to, basically relocate and find new life again. So my parents decided, while she has a green card, let's get out to the U.S. for that American dream. And so, out of the frying pan into the fire, or whatever they say, things are starting to look glaringly familiar as far as how, things are shaken out in the U.S. politically and what we saw happen overseas. So I'm happy to be a part of the conversation. I've always had family that's encouraged being part of that activism and standing up and fighting for your freedoms, your rights, fighting for others. And so anytime I've had the chance, I've tried to amplify any news, any information, or anybody that is actually back home and fighting, because a lot of that news doesn't make it out this way. And so it's hard to make those connections and connect those dots, or even see the bigger picture, like Audra's talking about, when you don't, see the other sides of it. So super happy to be part of the conversation, super happy to kind of help us facilitate, bring kind of that perspective from the Middle East, if I can, into what's happening, because I think that's part of the conversation that gets left out a lot, and a lot of people speak for it as opposed to seek out to converse about it. So I appreciate being here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you. Thanks for joining. Up next is
Thank you.
Zach.
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah. Hello there. Pleased to join you all today. Um, I live in the Netherlands, same as Audra. I live in The Hague. That's where all the international courts are. And I'm a socialist. I'm a libertarian socialist. But my CV is not what you'd expect from someone with my views. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm in business. I've been involved in structuring debt, working with banks, etc. So very untypical background for someone with my views. But it's fair to say that I get radical as I get older. I've been out. I'm a Londoner. I was born in London. I've been away from the UK for about 11 years now. I've been an expat in the Middle East, and for the last 5 years here in the Netherlands. And yeah, I think we need to cooperate to effect change, because someone mentioned earlier on about news media, propaganda. I mean, what you're having at the moment, I think, is a coup, really. Is a coup d'état where all the media is being purchased by oligarchs, and they feed a narrative to stupid people to blame minorities and diversity and all the rest of it, and people swallow it up, because if your life is shit, it's nice to think that there's someone who's doing worse than you are, and people take comfort in that, unfortunately. And what we're having here at the moment is the 1930s being repeated all over again. Just the sort of the sort of the blame has changed, in the sense that that certain people have replaced the minority groups in 30 that were the target. So I think we need to sort of we need to do what we can, to combine to change the narrative, and take rest back control.
Well said. It's a pleasure to have you on the panel.
Pleasure to be here.
Up next, we have Alexis.
Hi, everybody. My name is Alexis. For those of y'all international, I am from Southern California. For those of y'all more local, born and raised in Oxnard. My dad is from Michoacan, Mexico, but on my mom's side, we've been in Oxnard for the past 5-ish generations. Lived in Colonia. My family's lived in El Rio. My family now lives in South Oxnard. And I come to this panel as a water scientist, and I'm really focused on local solutions for the 805, specifically the Oxnard, Santa Paula area. My thing is trying to bring in indigenous knowledge into the mix, trying to interrogate how we are connected to land and water, and trying to figure out how that overlays with the very large Latino migrant community in Oxnard.
Thanks for joining. I'm really looking forward to hearing your perspectives. And last but not least, we have Wassem.
All right. Well, hello everyone. So my name is Wassem, and I'm an atmospheric scientist at the University of Saskatchewan. And so I'm right now studying to see, doing models to see if a CubeSat can measure the ozone layer. But I'm more interested. So I'm right now trying to finish my master's project for that this year, and so I want to get it all done. But then later on, I want to get more into more of like the climate science and the climate modeling aspect of those of that field. And yeah, so that's basically a little bit about myself, about my background in terms of, let's say, my social political views. It's basically been developed just by, at least through my education and also through my interactions as well. So I've got, my history teacher growing up. He gave us a lot of good ideas on how to synthesize things, look at how the world works, basically understands like cause and effect, things like that. So basically a lot of critical thinking with that. So that's how it kind of developed. So yeah.
Beautiful.
And that's a little bit about me, and I'll pass it over back to Jordan.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here. Really looking forward to hearing your expertise on these subjects. Zach, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, sorry, I omitted to mention the most important thing, that what I'm involved in now is basically a carbon sequestration. So we have a project in West Africa where we're restoring some mangroves. We've restored 1,000 hectares, and we're looking to initiate projects in other parts of the world as well. So yeah, sorry, I omitted to point out the most important thing. Yeah, no problem. I'm done now. Thank you.
That's awesome. Really appreciate you adding that in. Okay, so my first question for the panel is about the California wildfires and really wildfires around the world, our responses to it, and what role we think climate change is playing in the wildfire crisis that we've seen worldwide. Whoever wants to take that one first. Go for it, Alexis.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk specifically about the SoCal wildfires in Ventura County and LA County. I'm going to respond to the second part of your question: is climate change affecting it? 100%. It is exacerbating the wildfire situation globally, but also locally. Um, but the conditions that have, facilitated wildfires, the excess dry vegetation, and people generally not understanding that they live in a wildfire ecosystem is due to people just not being connected to water and land, due to indigenous peoples being removed from the land, the stewards being removed from the land, and due to like federal policy, specifically from like the U.S. Forest Service and somewhat like national parks outlying indigenous burns. So the wildfires that we have seen, in the news in Southern California, they were exacerbated by climate change, but the conditions is due to the removal of people and stewardship from the land, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, and I would add on to that too and say, I think that the media coverage of the wildfires, specifically in the LA area, kind of obfuscate in the sense of if you're not from Southern California, you get the sense that these are forest fires, and these are not forest fires. This is the wildland urban interface. And I've had to educate so many people about this. Like, these are not forested lands at all. Of course, these are areas that have burned for a millennia, but we're talking about basically suburban areas that are up against wildlands. This is not, we're not talking about paradise. We're not talking about like the Tahoe National Forest, for example. So I think it's really important, as leftists and as people that are educated on this topic, to differentiate so that people really have a broad understanding of what's going on here.
I'll just add that to the point about, outlawing backburning, and other indigenous practices, and also just the total failure of leadership. Like, we are experiencing the worst of climate at the worst time because we have such incompetent leadership. I won't get into it too much, but just, in the last 24 hours in the news, Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass totally unwilling to take any responsibility for her failures in the most recent, the Palisades fire specifically. She fired the LAFD chief. I mean, just a total dearth of leadership at the worst time.
I think, and I wanted to add to that, it's actually a great segue. The intentionality of the language that's used, first of all, is it's a forest fire. Oh, well, forest fires happen. Oh, it's just things that happen, over here. It's normal, very that normalization language. And then also the intentionality of the inefficiency of the system to kind of set way for that to not only just happen naturally, but then also to give cause for, taking that land and then using it for whatever purpose it is that you want. That, land exploitation, the deforestation. And then you've got, they do the poor water management service like we've seen in Iran, the dam projects, you've got dried up farmlands. And so then you're, sucking the economy out of those regions simultaneously. So it's that cause and effect is the intentionality is just so gross. And I think it's important when you do see all these different signs of it across the world, to notice that it's so connected and so specific.
Yeah, I like that you pointed out those parallels, and also going back to Heather's point about city planning. In the instance of Palisades, so Palisades is supposed to have a reservoir that was allocated specifically for these fires, and the reason that they put that there was because in Brentwood, which for those that don't know is a wealthy neighborhood in Los Angeles, they had a massive fire there in 1961 that was devastating. It destroyed over 500 homes. So they intentionally placed this reservoir in the Palisades neighborhood so that wouldn't be repeated. And look what happened, because when the fire came, the reservoir was empty. And we're talking about a wealthy neighborhood. So you can imagine how terrible it is in poor areas.
I went to a CVS in Brentwood, and I will attest that it's definitely nowadays, anyways, they've definitely done well and come up after the forest or the forest fires, that they had. So I think it's definitely interesting to always bring in the parallel, like you said, of the regions that then lose all of their resources.
Go ahead, Wasim.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, I think a lot of these points are extremely valid. Like there's the fire that happened just that just destroyed all the neighborhoods in LA and such. Like just looking at it, like I feel sorry for everyone that had to lose all that stuff. So that's what I want to say first as well. And but also like, you know, you mentioned about how the reservoir did not have any water. And that's one trend that I'm seeing a lot these days is that there's a lot of changes in humidity. For example, like these occur, let's say, in days when there's like really, really dry, but also really, really warm. So there's a lot of days, and then that's the same thing that happened up here in Canada in the past couple of years. So there's lots of forest fires, and as where there was a lot of days where there was lots of dryness, and then uh, there was also a lot of heat. So it made it easy for these fires to just start. And all it needed, let's say, somebody, let's say if they threw like a match or a cigarette out from the window or something, it would just be something like that, like, or maybe even a lightning strike, which is normal, but usually if it gets more intensified, that's the issue. And then there's the other thing too that I actually read a research paper that talked about certain species being able to act as like um, sort of like control rods in a nuclear reactor to kind of like control the spread of the fire by maintaining that moisture. So there's more species that could actually help uh, retain water, retain moisture in let's say a forest or in a valley, like the Palisades and so on and so forth. Um, and now there, and you mentioned before about indigenous knowledge as well. Yeah, that could certainly help with that in that regard by identifying which species can help with that as well. So those are some things that that are in my mind right now that just came to my mind. So yeah, and yeah. So also I am feeling a little bit ill too as well, so I might not be talking quite straight right now. So, yeah.
And also to that point about the conditions, the volatility of the humidity, like the levels of dryness and humidity. I was just seeing this morning that right now it's very dry, very warm. It's supposed to be in the 90s in parts of Southern California this weekend in the middle of February. But then within a week, it's going to revert back to wet and rainy, then flip back to unseasonably dry and hot. And so we continue to, waffle through, everyone thinks that, oh, phew, fire season is over, but it really isn't, right? And to Wasim's point, all it takes is, a lightning strike or, an arsonist taking advantage of a situation. And the problem with that is then the discussion about climate change kind of, or its role in these fires kind of flits into the background because now we're talking about the arsonist, right? And then it's easy for people to latch on to this idea that, oh, well, this was just, a bunch of bad actors working together to start fires and take advantage of a terrible weather pattern or whatever, when really it's still like an arsonist didn't cause 102-mile-per-hour winds like we saw in the last fire. Like an arsonist didn't cause that, but that conversation just doesn't happen because we're focused that, and the media is focused on, the guy that started the fire.
Right. And the phenomenon that Heather's describing there is called climate whiplash. and that's been specifically attributed to how California's climate is changing. So we go from periods of very wet conditions to very dry suddenly, to her point, within the span of a week. And, you know, yeah, we could be talking about an arsonist, but also an arsonist would be irrelevant if it didn't go 9 months with no rain. Like, we're experiencing, like, California's always been a dry place. We know this. We've always had fires, but um, they're not supposed to be year round. I remember even when I was a kid, and I'm not even 30 yet. I remember like in the early 2000s, by the time it was September, October, it was always cold and it was always raining. And then by the time I got into high school, it didn't start raining until closer to Christmas. And now we're starting to get into January and February with no rainfall. So it's right in front of us. I'll pass it over to Wasim.
Well, yeah, exactly. That's what we're seeing is that like was more um was climate change. There's a lot more heat in the atmosphere, and so that makes some of the high pressure systems, especially like the continental tropical ones as well, near the tropics, those start to intensify and get more. It tend to expand more, and so that's probably why you're seeing a lot less rain in Southern California there, which, um, but also, um, uh, and so that, and but also what's happening is that you have the jet stream is also kind of becoming more amplified too as well with the amplitude, and so that also slows the flow of low and high pressure systems that move around as well. And I think also go back to the earlier point about the fires and about how there's like the climate whiplash in the conversation and things like that. And yes, that kind of and it and that once sort of like people sort of dwell into that, it can get really confusing for people. And then there's kind of a strategy to kind of that people use to kind of do that as a way to deflect, but in a sense, the conversation is more so about like how intense they are getting and not about like what caused it or what this. Because like, arson could be anything from like leaving a campfire without, putting it out, or just like throwing a butt out randomly and whatever. And then there's also like the lightning strikes or whatever, which could cause forest fires, but it's just more so about how strong they are as well. That's kind of the how strong they are, how often they happen, and how fast they move. Yep.
Well said. Zach and then Alexis.
Yeah, Mike, it's more of a question really. It's directed at those of you who are in the States, and especially yourself, Jordan, being in California. I mean, we're a long way from what's going on over there. But what I can see is that in 2017, after Trump was elected, there was a lot of resistance. There was a movement, this whole resist thing. But at the moment, there just seems to be apathy. What are politicians on the so-called left? He hardly called the Democratic Party left, but what are they actually doing? Because it just seems to be complete apathy. These guys are just being allowed to do what they want, to take over, subvert democracy, subvert the constitution. Is actually anything going on the ground to give us some hope, or are we just in a situation where these guys are just going to take over the world? Give me some hope, please.
I think you notice that there's silence on the receiving end of asking for hope, because they're really not doing anything. I said in the chat box, they're really not doing anything except for giving EV subsidies. But Alexis, did you want to go now?
Yeah, I'll go to Zach's question than what I was going to say previously. So, yeah, what is the left doing and why is there apathy? In my opinion, there's apathy because for the first time, people that were no longer directly at risk from policies of the federal government, such as immigration or just immigration is the first thing top of mind, they are now being affected by it. And for the first time, if you are experiencing for the first time your federal government not being in your best interest, people get scared and people don't know what to do. But the individuals who have always been, I guess, proverbial targets of the federal government, again, migrant communities, again, the queer community, BIPOC communities, they have been through this. This isn't their first rodeo. So they are ready and equipped to continue to organize and to resist and to fight. And it is on, again, the proverbial left to look to the communities who have been in the fight, because for the first time, individuals who have never had to organize are now being targeted and they don't know what to do. But yeah, we got to look to our marginalized peoples to tell us what to do.
Really well said. Audra?
Yeah. Okay. I got some conspiracy theory fuel to add to this topic. So here's the deal. You know, where I come from in the middle of Missouri, or in the southwest corner of Missouri, it's a very red county, red state, full of red people that still are single party voting or supporting Trump in some effort and rationalizing what's happening right now. A lot of the reasons are, this is what Jesus has planned for us. So there's the Christo neoliberalism part of it that is kind of brainwashed to our elderly population. And then there's the MAGA part of it. And the MAGA part, full apathy, they're actually wanting this level of civil war. And I can say that very honestly from witness accounts who have told me, from family and friend members in years previous to this, they want a revolution. So a lot of people are enjoying what's happening right now, sadly. So it's not just apathy, it's excitement. I had a text message from an old high school boyfriend where we exchanged a few conversations about, what do you think's happening right now in America? He's like, I think it's great. I think it's finally time that we are exposing the underbelly. I'm like, yeah, I get that, but hi, we could do this without having an oligarch coup. And he's like, there's no coup. So you have a lot of people that are rationalizing it because they don't want to, you know, deal with maybe the overwhelm of it all. And then I really do think that it's the Democrats have been quiet since after he won the election. I was looking at a statistic today that said not since the 1960s has Trump had such a low approval score and rating, and that was post the election. And that was from the Financial Times. I can share the graphic in a minute. And it's very clear that already we know what AI is capable of doing. Elon has been recorded on an interview saying there will not be another US president. It doesn't matter who the president's going to be this time. He's already discounted the role of the US president. So there's enough evidence there. I think that the Democrats are so quiet simply because they want this revolution to occur. And I think they're just rolling over, and they're kind of putting this in as a moment to push into the American public space. This is what you voted for. Well, in my opinion, I think that the elections have been tampered with, this election and in 2016, hello, Cambridge Analytica. So, I mean, I really do think that foreign influences such as Russia have been in our politics and in our electoral system, at least in the EC, what it's easier probably to manipulate because at least there you buy out your representatives. So we already have so many politicians that are sponsored heavily over this last decade. There is no fighting it. So I think the Democrats now are all just be like, this is your lesson, American Republic. You wanted this is what you got. And then the rest of the American Republic, that is logic, they're like, this isn't what we were talking about. This is, you know, we tried to support her. But honestly, the two-party system doesn't work. We have to reform the two-party system. So ahead of midterms, what do? Okay, we're going to vote independent. Great, but that independent candidate is not going to win unless there's some sort of organized resistance campaign backing that person. Like we could throw up Bernie Sanders' name and then at the last minute pull in a wild card candidate and say, okay, Bernie's not going to run, but it's going to be his little mini protege here. And people, I think, would accept that more than the reality of another Democratic nominee coming ahead that the DNC has put forward. It's not realistic anymore. This two-party fighting thing, it's ruined our democracy. The republic is over. We need a new constitution. I know I sound very anti-American. That's why I don't live there. I'm done.
I think just to jump off of what you're saying, basically is, I mean, you see this happen other places in different formats, and they've kind of taken something they've seen somewhere else and push their buttons over here, if you will, take an inch, or give an inch, they take a mile, and they notice that if overseas, we don't have any intersectional feminism or intersectional, activism. If our feminism is limited to this area, if our activism is limited to this thing, then we're not connecting those dots and we're not coming together. And we're not realizing that, okay, well, the politics is also affecting our environment and so on. And so we're not banding that together, and that's a problem. And they're benefiting off of that. And like you said, the Democrats, I mean, they're paid by the same lobbyists. They'll just come out on top just as the good guys, they'll come out on top with a bow. I mean, if you guys have seen the meme of Kamala with her champagne glass turning around looking real smug, that's all it is they'll get to still be winners, just the smug ones, instead of, the ones that look like the dictators or Julius Caesar or whatever the new thing is. That's absolutely ridiculous. But you see this everywhere. And I read somewhere someone said, oh, finally, America is being run like a business. It's you basically, they're dismantling it and selling it for parts. And they're doing that with, everything that affects our environment, everything that affects our minority groups, our indigenous groups. And all of these things are just barrel rolling into this massive amounts of destruction that's going to ripple across. And what's interesting is even in the leftist conversations, it's really hard to find that niche where people are still conversing about all of those things simultaneously and even involving other people in that conversation or being interested in seeing what the connections are. And I'm even hearing people say things, having also lived in a red state, hearing people that say things that are completely not just disassociated and in their own kind of realm, but also people that should know better saying things like, oh, well, we have time. Well, that's not, it's not going to dismantle that quickly. It's not going to happen now. But we have nothing to kind of, back that up. So I don't understand why there's that sort of complacency, or I don't know if it's just like a comfort of it's America, so it's not going to be that bad. I'm not really sure what it is, but it's almost like because they're kind of keeping that that conversation separate, people aren't doing the work to put it together, and it's just going to be to our detriment in the long run if we don't figure out how to bring those conversations together.
Agreed. I think it was Zach up next.
Yeah, thank you. I think Shirin stole my thunder somewhat there, because the point I wanted to make was really about campaign, the PAC thing, with campaign contributions coming from global capital and from big business, and really it's just a question of following the money. And until the Democrat leadership are no longer tainted by corporate money, then they're no different to the others, really. I mean, if you think about it, the reason we have Trump is because the Democrats were just so bad. They didn't offer an alternative. Nicer language, a bit more inclusive, but fundamentally kowtowing to global capital and big business, At least Trump had the balls to say he wasn't, even though he is. I mean, he's clearly an establishment figure, but, he's created this narrative that somehow he's anti-establishment, which is laughable to anyone with a brain cell, but, clearly the rednecks didn't see that. But yeah, when are we going to have a left in America which is not also corrupted by campaign contributions? Because fundamentally it means that there's no alternative. What's being offered is exactly the same as the other side, really. Just light, And by the way, are you all in America apart from me, Wassem, and Audra?
I'm in Poland.
Oh, you're in Poland? Yeah, you said yeah, but you're from California, right? Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
I'm in Oxnard also. And I just wanted to add to your point that I do think that the Democratic Party has become almost cynical about their politics now, in the sense that if you don't have they're so focused on the money, right? To and campaign contributions, and climate focused candidates are not the ones that can raise a lot of money typically, because climate change, even though so many people are being impacted by it, is still just really not an electable topic. um, so and I've been working in politics and consulting since 2006, and in the last, like, I want to say 2 election cycles, the conversation about climate change has very much disappeared. In fact, I was just thinking about this today here in our Oxnard elections. This last election cycle, I don't think that any of our local candidates discussed the topic of climate change at all in their campaigns, when we had a major flood that destroyed tons of people's homes just last year, um, out in Port Hueneme. And Oxnard is one of the key places that is looking to experience sea level rise, probably in our lifetimes. So, but the people that won uh, uh, barely discussed it at all, which was shocking to me. But it's just not it's not seen by them as an electable topic. So.
I think one of the reasons that we haven't made substantial progress on the climate crisis is in part due to a messaging issue. And what I mean by this is, I think that the people that don't quite understand the scale of the crisis are under the impression that it's just like liberals pushing veganism and personal consumption, and not necessarily like 100 companies are responsible for 90% of the crisis. So I think if you were able to message it in an effective way like that and bring together class consciousness, you could mobilize a greater portion of the population to take meaningful action on the climate crisis. Go for it, Wasim.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Uh, my colleagues, one thing that he mentioned is that, like, I remember when he was teaching us aeronomy in his class, and then there was one part where we would talk about sort of the Paris Climate Accord and the targets around it, and he said that, like, he doesn't like getting too much into the politics because he just knows that, like, it's to him, it's almost beyond reach. But for me, I feel like, though, uh, as what many of you are saying, I feel like leadership on the climate is certainly not going to come from the US, in my opinion. In my opinion, actually, because um, a lot of the countries that are right now taking leadership on the issue are either, uh, let's say in South America, Africa, you know, South and East Asia, and also even places in Europe too. Like, I don't think that leadership is going to come from the US or uh, at any point, because, and which is unfortunate, because that's the one. And you mentioned before about, like, messaging, right? And that's one thing that, you know not the messaging has to be, is that the only way it would be effective is getting them to understand it. So one thing that I actually do outside of my work is I actually give tours at, like, a local scientific laboratory, and one of the research posters that we have is about climate change as well, and it talks about it and talks about the research that is done there. And when I show it, I show a nice uh, a project that's done about sea level, or sea acidity, sorry, and temperature, and its relationship with temperature. And one analogy I like to give to get people to understand how the concept of climate change works is just really going to the basics and just describing to them, what is the greenhouse effect? What is a greenhouse gas? What does it do to the earth? And so the way I give it is I kind of explain to it as like an analogy. So you have, right, light from the sun, it comes to the earth, and then that earth then absorbs the energy, and then it releases infrared radiation, and then that infrared radiation is reflected back by clouds or get like trace gases like carbon dioxide. So that's called the greenhouse effect. And the way I add on to that, I elaborate by saying it's like, you're sleeping in your bed, right? And so I mentioned to them that, like, if you're sleeping in let's say in your bed, and let's say you want to be at a nice temperature you want to sleep at, right? You don't put like 5 or 6 covers on it, because if you do that, you could overheat yourself and you get sick and dehydrated and whatever. And so what do you do in that case? You have to take it off. And so those greenhouse gases, they're like the blankets that I'm talking about. That's what they do to the earth. And so that helps them actually understand sort of the picture and how you can make it more personal and personally relatable to people. And so that's, I think, one thing that can help the messaging sort of get better, because when they kind of rely on, let's say, like market solutions or something, it becomes more of like a sales pitch and less more of, let's say, something that that can be intuitive, that they can think of. And so I think providing more of a bit of an intuition can give them a lot more inspiration and less of a sales pitch. And I think that's where the world needs to do, is that they need, whoever's taking leadership, it has to be, a scientist. It has to be someone, like indigenous, or like black indigenous people of color, whatever, who's on leadership on that, or whoever is, or let's say any scientific expert or whatever who knows, who can understand that. Put them at the forefront for that in terms of communication.
Alexis, then Zach.
So I agree with you all, with Wassem, with Jordan, with Heather, that there is education needed, and there is like a messaging issue when it comes to climate change. But part of that is also is that the individuals who are experiencing climate change first and worst, again, gonna keep it to Oxnard because that's what I know. For example, like our field worker community, our campesino community, who a lot of them do not know English. A lot of them may not know Spanish, may talk an indigenous language, may not be literate, which is the case for my family. My family comes from campesinos, we're not literate. But even though they don't have the scientific background to understand greenhouse gases or to understand market solutions or whatever education is needed, they do understand what is happening. They are feeling, again, in Southern California, the wildfire smoke. They are feeling the heat waves. They are feeling the frost happening. They are feeling the floods. But part of the issue of the messaging is that the people that are experiencing climate change first and worst aren't in the decision-making rooms. So that's also part of it. We need to educate the individuals who are decision makers, but also bring the people that are already experiencing climate change into those rooms to tell their actual human stories, to convince people that, like, hey, this is happening.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'll pass it over to Zach.
Yeah, I think just following on from what's been said already, I mean, the messaging needs to come from the leadership, the people who are in the public eye, the people who lead us, and the Democrat Party is a failure. It's not capable of doing that because it's just completely run by big business. I mean, there needs to be some kind of coup, and there needs to be a situation where the people who are standing as elected officials are clean and are not tainted by corporate money, because no corporation is going to back climate change action. No big business is going to be for. Look at them. It's taken them 5 minutes to drop diversity initiatives. Yeah, these companies, one after the other. Goldman Sachs and HS was it? I can't remember who it was today, but Citibank. It's taken them literally a few weeks to drop all the diversity initiatives. Right. So the idea that anyone elected on a ticket that's been financed by big business is going to be, green is ludicrous, really. So, um, I think the Green Party or Green politicians need to sort of engineer some kind of coup so that they are having the tickets. I mean, if it's possible for AOC to do it, yeah, without any, with only private campaign contributions, no business contributions, and surely, it shows that it's possible, right? It can be done, but there needs to be the desire to do it, and messaging can only come from people, by charismatic leadership, by good leadership. I mean, Bernie's a good message bearer generally, and he's been around forever, so it is possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Like, in adding to what Alexis and what Zach was saying, you know, there's a lot, and there's certainly a lot of ways that, a lot of things that need to be done differently to get uh, to the movement to where it needs to go. And certainly, like I said before, the Democratic Party and certainly not the Republican Party either. Like, change is not going to come through them, and change is not going to come from the USA in terms of that. I think our leadership, global leadership in general, is not going to come from the USA. But I think that, if um, the best way though to kind of uh, get sort of, let's say, try and get that conversation is like what Zach was saying before, like just have like the Green Party, or let's say PSL, even try and push, let's say, maybe some ideas more to the left, or try and get candidates to try and break the duopoly. Even, like, for example, in Nebraska there was Dan Osborne who almost did that, but just as an independent candidate. And even as an independent, yeah, it could probably help a lot more than just probably associating with a party, because some people, they might not like the idea of parties sometimes. But in a sense, though, there are certain ways to go about with that. And of course, yeah, the problem is that there needs to be a way of doing leadership. But then also, for us as well as scientists, we also have to kind of probably change the strategy a bit. For example, instead of associating with political parties, we can associate with um, uh, groups, let's say, like Black Lives Matter or Free Palestine, or even, let's say, unions, for example, too, because unions, right, they have a lot of the skilled workers and things like that to um, be able to bring change across, different backgrounds like that as well. And we need to talk, ally ourselves with unions and make them also be part of the conversation, to be part of the process, and being leaders at that as well, and how they can contribute, and showing them what they can do to contribute would be, I think, a big change, a good way to start.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely, and I would also just expand it on Alexis's point. I think that there's a sort of elitism that's associated with the climate crisis in the scientific community. So, if we could elaborate on that and make it so it's more inclusive, more intersectional, and more focused on class consciousness, I think that we could make a lot more waves in messaging it better and getting people to take it more seriously. If anybody has any final thoughts on this, the time is now. Otherwise, I'm going to switch over to bird flu. Okay.
Yeah, I guess one last thought, just following on from what Wassem said. I'm just looking here. The Green Party in the UK last election, 4 seats, 4 MPs. Doesn't sound like a lot, but when I was a kid, it was unthinkable that there would be any other party apart from Labour and Conservative. It is possible. It can be done. It needs organisation and needs to move away from the mainstream Democratic Party, which is just corrupt. But anyway, that's the final thought on that. Thank you.
So going to bird flu now, my question for the panel is: do you think that we're headed for another pandemic? And if we are, do you think that we'll even know about it? I'm especially talking to the Americans on the panel because of our current political climate, but really it's open to everyone abroad. So whoever wants to take that first. Shireen?
If I may, yeah. Coming from the perspective of having the Iranian regime's effect on Iran and how they handle things, and kind of seeing the parallels of the way America is moving forward, there's obviously no money in investing in the people's health. There's money in keeping them sick, keeping them um, down, keeping them from, if they're unhealthy, they're not gathering, they're not rising, they're not, you know, it's a good control tactic, and it's a good way to, keep continuing to set those minority groups against each other. People feel like they're not getting the resources they need. So I feel like the way that it's headed, it would only behoove the current administration and their kind of processes. It would behoove them basically to not tell us everything, as they don't anyways, but to kind of suppress it, tell us too late, wait until those minority populations that are heavily going to be affected are already sick or already, so aside from that, add in the fact that they want control of over the market, to as far as what's produced and what's given out to the people. That's a lot of control that I just don't see that the current administration would necessarily give up, um, if they are continuing to shape their methods, in ways that we've seen happen, across Europe and the Middle East.
Anyone want to carry out that point?
I think it goes back to Alexis's point also about the people who are impacted the greatest, like you just said, Shirin. Um, Farm workers, we saw with COVID, had some of the initial, and are still experiencing some of um, the the worst outcomes. The homeless population, our unhoused population, is much more vulnerable, especially with bird flu, um, because I mean, you get it by contact with even wild birds, um, and now we just found out, I think yesterday, that there are rats testing positive for bird flu. And I mean, if you go anywhere in Oxnard, you see rat traps everywhere. There are rats all over the place. Some neighborhoods are called Rat Alley here and in Camarillo, just south of Oxnard. Um, but at the risk of sounding really cynical, and being either conspiratorial or just dark, I think it's a convenient way to solve a problem for a lot of politicians, especially when you're looking at, again, back to our unhoused community. That's a really sticky problem for regional governments and state government especially. And there's not a lot of motivation to educate and help and take care of people that you don't really want to continue to deal with anyway, which is just really awful.
Yeah, I was just going to make a quick point. It's indicative of the science in the United States that one of the biggest species that's facing possibly even extinction for the first time again since the 1970s are bald eagles. Vast amounts of bald eagles are being killed by the bird flu. And that's, supposed to be the symbol of the US. And here we are just kind of watching it happen while we twiddle our thumbs. And then that's just the tip of the iceberg, because this has the potential to collapse biodiversity as a whole.
And to the point, Jordan, I mean, just 2 years ago, we were talking about how in 100 years, 33% of the world's biodiversity is expected to go extinct from climate change. And the fact that we're not able to connect that COVID and bird flu are climate change, and that this is part of what will lead to that extinction. I mean, it's just total loss of critical thinking, and the ability to connect the, this to me is connecting dots, but not many people seem.
Yeah, I just wanted to make one point real quick. Um, Scientists are saying that climate change is likely the number one driver of bird flu. So this isn't our opinion. This isn't speculation. These are experts that are making these claims. I think
I
so.
think it's interesting though that people aren't, it's almost like that willful ignorance, like they're too afraid to address it, because if they address it that it's happening, then they're going to have to do something about it. But it's interesting because, like Heather said, connecting the dots, if you're really looking at it, it's all accelerating, and it's getting to a point where you can't ignore it, because if you do, you're going to be directly affected. So it's very interesting to see that the people still trying really hard to justify not paying attention to it, like they still have time, or while they're literally seeing, it's like you said, the whiplash effect that we're getting. I mean, you've got people who are in their 30s that feel like they're 60 years old on a daily basis because of all the changes that we're going through, and all the viruses. And so the compacted effect of everything is just, it's hard to ignore. So I'm curious as how far people's willful ignorance for that will go before they kind of have to address it. Acid rain, like what are we dealing with?
Zach, you were next.
Yeah, I just think it's following on from what has been said over the last couple of conversations. The idea that you can radically interfere with nature's natural balance, radically interfere with it, and expect that there will be no no comeback on that. It's just illogical. It's just ludicrous, and people are living in denial. I mean, everything that we talk about is affected by climate change. Whether it's COVID, whether it's bird flu, whether it's mad cow disease. The moment humans start interfering with nature's natural balance above a certain level, then things happen. The forest fires, not forest fires, but the urban fires in California. But how do we get that message across? I mean, we're failing, aren't we? Because people don't understand this, don't seem to understand this. The biggest catastrophe we face as a species is climate change. Yet, you have a guy sitting in the White House who says it's hoax, it's made up. It's depressing.
Yeah, definitely. Wasim and then Shirin.
Yeah, and so the climate change and its links towards, let's say, health issues, and is certainly a growing topic right now, actually, and especially like what Jordan mentioned, right? It's now becoming a risk factor, let's say, for bird flu or infections, and and so this is certainly going to be a conversation that's going to be coming up. Let's say, just that's not going to go away. I think it's probably going to become more relevant, especially now since there's research, especially with me as I'm a martial arts instructor, and I actually read an articles talking about how climate change is also affecting, let's say, performance in, let's say, sports or something like that. And so it could be there's a risk factor for that. And let's say, what are the variables for that? And looking into that, maybe if I go on and do a PhD or something, especially, since the field is I want to get into is, let's say, climate change, that could be something, for me personally, that's something that I would like to contribute to, is maybe with some of my colleagues in kinesiology to see if they want to look into that more further. And there are certainly risk factors. Like, once, I think the big issue, especially in terms of kinesiology, talking from that perspective, is that, once the issue with that would be the wet bulb temperature. So if there's like lots of humidity, it's harder for your body to cool off. So that puts you at a higher risk of like a heat stroke or something like that. So, and things like that. So that's one sort of intuitive way of thinking of that. So there's a lot. So looking at how, and so that's certainly, you know, conversations around, let's say, the health issues and things like that could be, it's certainly going to be more and more relevant, I think.
Yeah, well said. I actually had a question for you, Wasim. As somebody that's an expert in climate science, can you talk about the significance of the permafrost melting and the ancient viruses that are being released because of that?
All right. There we go. The permafrost. Oh yeah, that is an issue. Yeah, there is an issue about so the permafrost. Yeah, it is becoming more and more weaker because of climate change, and it's also starting to melt, and so there's the issue that the permafrost, right? It has held a lot of, say, ancient viruses that have been stored, let's say, for eons, right? And now for me, in terms of, let's say, what is in the permafrost, I'm not entirely sure because I'm not a definite expert on this, but what we do know is that there are viruses, right? Let's say stored in geological, and the issue would be figuring out which ones are active, which ones are still, let's say, live and active, and which ones, uh, you know, are capable of infecting humans or hominins in that sense. So that would be the identifying, what kinds of viruses there are in there. But I think also the bigger issue for the permafrost, as well as since it's receding, is that there's also, because there's a lot of, let's say, ancient, you know, biological matter that's preserved in there that we know of, like, for example, the viruses. A lot of it has already been, let's say, converted into gases like methane, which is a greenhouse gas. And so if the permafrost recedes, methane, it could be easy. The Earth might easily, well, not the Earth, but the methane itself might start to move around freely a little bit more, and it might start to sort of, I want to say, like, almost like evaporate in a sense, like sort of get like emitted out in a sense, like into the atmosphere, and then so that could also increase the greenhouse effect to intensify it as before, like adding more blankets, as I was saying before,
Right.
to
And the
it. So
reason
that's
being is because methane is a much more potent greenhouse gas than CO2.
yeah, methane. Yeah, it is highly potent, actually, almost as potent as CO2, to be honest, as a greenhouse gas, and so it's one of And so that's also one of the big issues about the permafrost, is that what we'll know is that there is a lot of methane that is stored within the biological matter within the permafrost, and so um, there there's the risk that if that recedes, then there will be a lot of methane that might be emitted out into the atmosphere for that. And
Right. In one
figuring out that
specific,
rate,
sorry, go ahead.
yeah, and the big issue would be, figuring out that rate, because then, you know, because we want to know, let's say, because if that's a fast or a slow process, because if it's a fast process, then yeah, that's a huge issue.
Right. In one specific example that I read about for an ancient virus that was released because of melting permafrost was back in 2016. There was anthrax that was released, and it was actually zoonotic in the sense of once the virus receded from the permafrost, it jumped to reindeer, and multiple reindeer actually died, and some humans got sickened. I don't think any humans died, but they got sick because of this ancient strain of anthrax, and this is just foreshadowing what's further to come, unfortunately. Heather.
Yeah, and to Audra's point in the chat about our new HHS whatever he's the HHS Secretary RFK Jr. And just the Trump administration's policy priorities are not to prioritize research grants, funding of research grants. So in terms of, uh, studying what viruses are active coming out of the permafrost, US isn't going to do that shit. We're also not going to study antivirals. We're not gonna fund any kind of research into therapies or vaccines. God forbid we address vaccines. I mean, you know, we're fucked. for lack of a better term, to Audra's point, now that RFK is heading up our health ecosystem here in healthcare and science ecosystem, we're fucked. So
Shirin.
I think to kind of go with the RFK theme here, he's such an easy tool to put in place, and basically, politically, and affect in a health wise all of the people that you need to directly affect. Basically, anyone that's a woman or disabled or anything is just screwed, and then all the minority groups within that even more so. So you've got somebody that's standing up there literally telling a woman of color that he believes that African Americans are differently affected by the virus, so they don't need as many vaccines as regular people do, so you guys are more immune. So I mean, the weird conspiracy wildness of his thought process was funny for a while, but it's so dangerous at this point because it's going to be directly affecting those people that are going to be already more heavily affected by environmental changes, all of the health crises that are going to be compacting them all at once. So having somebody like him there is such a tool of repression in like an inefficient, systematic way that's just going to be so chaotic and terrifying that I think how dangerous it is something that we need to address. Aside from how ridiculous it is, a little earlier on than I hope we do. I hope we're not as reactive to that, because he's scary. It's like it's not small things anymore. It's not small potatoes. It's not just the seasonal yearly flu that we get, and it's to a point where you've got Olympic athletes that are passing out, while doing their exercises. If an Olympic athlete is passing out, then if you're already autoimmune suppressed, if you're part of a more heavily affected minority group, whatever it is, it's just that much more dangerous to just kind of let a person like that bulldoze their way through office.
Yeah, and he wants to ban SSRIs, ADHD medication, and then not only that, the cherry on top, he wants to put people in labor camps, like specialized farms.
But guns are still cool, you guys. That's a fun parallel there.
Yeah. Heather, go ahead.
Well, to that point about how dangerous RFK Jr. is, and really the entire Republican Party, and I've talked about this on past episodes and panels, but I every once in a while they say something that is actually really spot on, and that's what's so dangerous about them, right? Like that's what's so dangerous about DeSantis is every once in a while he says something that's absolutely true. And it's like, wow, okay, well, a lot of people cling to that. They they get that confirmation bias, and they cling to that one thing he said that's true, and then they say, okay, well, everything he must say is true. A lot of stuff Trump says is actually true. Like the stuff about how hard people have had with the cost of living. That was a very true thing that people, I think, latched onto and ended up voting for him under that guise. But with RFK Jr., something he has talked about, which I think is true and what makes him so dangerous, because then people start listening, is the problem of chronic illness in America. Because chronic disease is a huge problem in America. I think something like 60% of Americans now have at least one chronic illness. And I keep thinking, like, why can't he just focus on that? like, like, just focus on that. Forget about the SSRI farms. Forget about the labor camps. Forget about the anti-vax shit. Like, just focus on the chronic illness thing. Because or the thing about the dyes in food, like that, I can get on board with that. Like, I can get on board with that. But that's what makes the right so dangerous, is that they're able to say something that appeals to enough people that then are willing to just be a total open ear to them. And that's where we are now.
It's almost like we have a major problem with critical thinking.
Yeah. It's almost like over half of Americans are unable to read above a 6th grade level. And that's the consequence of that.
I wonder if the education system, being slowly dismantled over time has anything to do with how easy the population is to, swindle.
It's
Manipulate.
definitely
Yeah.
it's definitely not because we've given way too much money to the military or anything.
Yeah, well, I think whoever stands next time round needs to take on the tech bros because they have a lot to answer for, don't they? I mean, in terms of dumbing down and brainwashing, creating the culture, creating a generation with no ability to think critically, and they're totally obsessed with popular culture. And it's the ideal fodder of someone like Trump, isn't it? With all the sort of popular sound bites and everything. It's easy.
Yep. Wassem.
Yes. So yeah, so I did crash out for maybe a second or two there, but I still got the gist of the conversation still, so it's all good. And for me, especially as I think I forgot to mention this at the beginning, but yeah, I'm a gay queer Lebanese Arab as well, and so it was the issue as with Palestine and things like that. It gets and a lot of you, what we're mentioning basically is basically just political propaganda. And for me, seeing it from the perspective, from Israel and Russia and all that stuff, it's quite, um, this is not new to me. Like this is, this is what basically many politicians do is they try what they do. What they do is they don't blatantly say fake news all the time, but what they do is they inject a bit of truth into it, but then stir it in their own kind of way. That's what they do. That's how they kind of manipulate propaganda a lot. So that way, there's an expression that they call it not even wrong, but what it is what they mean by that is that they don't tell the truth, but then they don't state, but then what they state is like something that it's kind of like almost like Moat and Bailey in a sense, and it's like they don't really uh, state the full-on truth, but they just kind of spin the narrative in their own way. So like what Heather was saying before, like with Ron DeSantis, he would, they would say something that is blatantly true, right? That's very objectively true, but then what they do is they would spin it in their own way, and then people they would understand that the portion that's true, but then Ron DeSantis would come out and then prescribe something that is completely you know you know just detrimental and just counterintuitive and whatever, but even or illogical. And that's kind of how they promote their ideas in a sense that are they could be like pure fake news, but it's not really like pure thing. That's the thing, is that with this kind of propaganda that is not like, it's not like blatant fake news. It's mostly just like ways of like encouraging, like they tell truths, but then they just sort of push through with their own narrative on that. So that's one way to look at it. But also like, especially the states, like Russia and Israel, they do it very maniacally evil, in very evil ways too, as we're all able to see very clearly. So
Yeah, definitely. So I'm ready to wrap up. If anybody has any final thoughts before we do plugs.
Yeah, just one extra thing to what Wassem just said. In Europe now, you have these political parties in the Netherlands and the UK, Reform and Geert Wilders' party over here, which are private companies, which don't disclose anything basically about where the money comes from. And I'd bet bottom dollar that Reform in the UK and Geert Wilders' party here, or whatever it's called, Freedom Party, whatever it's called, I'd wager that a lot of the campaign contributions come from those two countries.
Yep. Audra, then Alexis.
Okay, so there's a few points that I just want to wrap up because we were all talking about so many different things. And, I'm really trying to look at this whole thing from a bird's eye view of the American abroad perspective. And there's so much hope and inspiration to be found. And I'm like having reflection as I was eating my dinner, listening to everybody speak. And I'm like, God, this just sounds completely hopeless and scary. The thing is, we have to recognize, like we said earlier in the call, we are repeating a part of history that we've already lived through before. These trends are not unusual. If you go and look up in the Oxford Dictionary, apocalypse, look up the word, you'll see that it's been referenced since the dawn of time, since we've had human language in Latin. And apocalypse, actually, the word itself doesn't mean the end of times. It means rebirth, regeneration. So we've already gone through this. The most recent quote being from somebody that was stating in 1994 that it would be the oligarchs that will lead the next apocalypse that we go into. And that's like the last quote out of 20 different quotes over the period of history. So we have to keep in mind that this is a trend, and these trends, like they did in the 30s, it's going to grow. So I'm already on the timeline that World War III began in 2014 when Russia invaded the southern peninsula of Ukraine. So once we wrap our head around this in a linear fashion and realize that energetically, World War III has begun a long time ago. We're already dealing with space wars and tech wars. We're dealing with the oligarchy now. We are living the dystopian future. So when you put a stoic mindset behind that, we can rise above. We can organize, we can get together. And what I would recommend for Americans everywhere is to make sure that you have contacts outside of America that you're staying informed by right now. Because I realized it 8 years ago that my family and friends in Missouri were not being informed with the same news articles and the same topics that I was reading about on this side of the Atlantic. And I think that the propaganda is just going to be so thick and so intense. And I do think there's going to be a lot of protesting and media backlash. And I think people are starting to find their agency and their autonomy. So you start to see the uprising. And keep in mind, revolution in an American sense, it's bloody battle war. It's Hollywood-esque, and that's not what a revolution is. A revolution is artistic, it's created, it's invoked in song and art and dance, and it's a movement. It's not a fucking war. So when Elon comes out with this goddamn chainsaw and it looks like a scene from Idiocracy, we have to remember it is our job as citizens, as we the people, to tell another citizen, this isn't right, y'all. We need to actually step back for a moment and say, what kind of behavior is this that's being accepted? Where are our common values? Where's that golden rule? So this starts via word of mouth conversations. It's not about your online connections. It's about what's happening in your house. Are you talking with your children about these topics? Because this is their fucking future. The boomers are all going to be dead in 20, 30 years. So we really got to like inspire and instill hope in people. And then from an astrological point of view, because, I'm into the whole woo thing, I will say that Mars actually today we've been in retrograde since December 6th, and it's leaving the Leo spot that it's in, the Cancer spot that it's in. And Trump is a Leo rising, and he has a Mars 12th house placement. And what that means, loosely translated, in the coming weeks, he's going to experience more legal troubles, more battles, more reveal of hidden enemies. So I also think that something's going to happen with his health in the coming months as Mars settles into a new sign. And I think what that will bring is it'll get him sick. And he now starts to lose so much popularity that once he's gone, nobody's going to care anymore because we all realize he's been a puppet. But please beware, because JD Vance is much more scary than what Trump is.
Just to be
That's
clear,
it.
we're talking about the JD Vance that wore capri pants the other day, right?
I knew I took that photo for a reason.
Bringing high waters
At
back.
oh, so embarrassing.
Least he wasn't sipping bourbon in Brussels. We're really embarrassing these days.
I lost track of what the order was. I think Alexis was next.
So on the point of Audra to like leave y'all with some hope, specific to people living in the States, the federal government will not come to save you in terms of climate change. And the most influence that you have is in your local environment, in your local city, county, township. Go out, get involved. There's already so many organizations and organizers that have been organizing towards climate change, towards general like intersectional issues. Talk to them. And as far as like, well, like I'm tired, why do I need to do this? You will be somebody's ancestor one day. Like it's for the kids, it's for the children, it's not for you. So when you are long gone in 150 years and your kin are praying, ancestors, please give me strength, that's going to be you. And you're going to be able to say, yeah, I gave a fight and I gave a shit about you. So, yes, there is hope. Get outside and organize in your local community.
Beautiful.
Or even just have a conversation with your neighbor.
Yeah.
Like even if organizing is too much, or I think something we didn't touch on is a lot of apathy, I think, about climate change is about how busy people are. Like it's hard to worry about climate change when you're working 3 jobs, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you can still you still go next door and talk to your neighbor and be like, hey, did you know there's a big storm coming? Like, do you have your supplies? Do you have water? Can I go get you some toilet paper? Just fucking talk to your neighbor. Like, that's more than enough, even.
Make it achievable. I think a lot of people are so overwhelmed. If you give people something small they can do, because we don't all need to be in the street with pickets and all the time. There's going to be change from everywhere. So being able to give people those little resources are awesome, to say, hey, this is something achievable that you can do.
Yeah, great points all around. Heather, you also reminded me of just like the double-edged sword impact of social media. So social media is great for informing people, but it can also be weaponized as a form of propaganda, and also specifically around the concept of like doom scrolling. That's counter-revolutionary and can cause people to spiral in a negative way towards their mental health, which is obviously not ideal when you're trying to build a movement around solidarity.
Yeah, that's true. Don't get too much into the doom scrolling trap. And I know it's very easy to do that on social media as well. And same as, and yes, the best thing to do is just to, like what Heather was saying, go outside, touch some grass, and then just basically doesn't have to be about, going and grabbing, supplies or anything, like especially if there's like no emergency, but also just basically talk with your friends and ask, open up to them on how you feel about things in the world. Just tell them exactly how you feel, and don't be afraid to. No, don't be afraid to do that to your neighbor either. I'm sure they'll be welcoming and comforting, especially if the neighbor is a good, nice one as well.
I just have one more point too. I want to follow up on what Alexis said. There are already people out there organizing. And I think a lot of people feel like they have to reinvent the wheel or they'd have to start from scratch. No. Just look around, because you can probably find a group that aligns with your values and is already doing the work and would be happy to join you, for you to join them. That is, if you have the time.
Right. Okay, so I think we should do plugs now. Everybody shout out your social media, any projects you're working on. If you're comfortable, list ways that people can find you online. I'll do a reverse order this time, so I'll start with Zach.
Yeah, just in terms of plugs, yeah, just our project really. I want to put the domain on there, the website, bluecarboncredits.nl. We are restoring mangroves. And it's not just about carbon sequestration value of mangroves. It's also about the local community. The habitat, the community, building education facilities and health facilities for the community there as well, giving them an alternative way of making a living, which is environmentally friendly. So I guess Wassem is probably the closest professionally to what we do. So I don't know if there's any overlap. Maybe we can discuss that at some point. But yeah, any ideas, any thoughts on how we can help? At the moment, my task is to, as I said, we restore over 1,000 hectares of mangroves, but now we have to register these the project so that we can sell our carbon credits to polluting companies to try to make them compensate us for the damage they're doing to the environment. That's my plug. Thank you.
Thanks so much for being on the panel, and I'd love to have more conversations with you as well, Zach. So
likewise.
Hope you have a great rest of your night. Thank you.
Cheers.
Alexis?
So people can find me on Instagram at Chicana_ecologist. I don't really post a bunch. I am a grad student. I'm also getting my master's. So the point of that Instagram is to document my grad school experience, but I'm very busy, so I don't post a lot. I'm trying to figure out ways of how people specifically in Oxnard can get more involved in their water resources and what's happening with water. So maybe I'll post videos, maybe not. But to Heather's point of getting involved in what is already happening, people local to Oxnard, there's so many good organizations that have been on the ball in terms of organizing. We got Hero, Heart of El Rio, doing cleanups in El Rio. We got Mini Nature Reserve if you're interested in local stewardship of native plants. We got VC Defensa for migrant rights. We got Coastal Keepers for beach cleanups. We got La Buffy, who just does general stuff in the art scene. They're hosting an art show on March 7th, I believe. So there's so many things happening in Oxnard and Ventura County. Check out those people.
Thanks so much for joining the panel, Alexis. I loved your contributions, and thank you for all the great work that you do in our community in Ventura County. Up next is Wassem.
Right. Yeah. Well, so my plans, right? Again, the project that I'm trying to finish now is my master's, right? So this year I'm trying my best to finish it, how I can move on and then possibly do a PhD, hopefully, maybe next year, depending on, let's say scholarship funding or, a stipend and things like that. So it's going to depend a lot on that, but hopefully, moving into the field more so into climate, just sort of like the mathematics and modeling and also analyzing data on climate trends in the atmospheres. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Well,
thank you again for joining the panel. I always love listening to your expertise as a climate scientist. Obviously, this is a big passion of mine, so I could listen to you all day. I'll pass it over to Shirin.
So as far as my activism goes, all of that, you guys, if you are interested in following the conversation, we talk about it every week on Freedom Hour Iran, which is actually cast live on a community radio show that started out of Louisville, Kentucky, WXOX, and is also online. So other radio stations, there's a couple, 2 or 3 different ones in Middle America that pick it up randomly to play it as well, which is exciting. But it started an effort to bring the English version of the communication and the forwarding of the stories of what's happening in Iran. So recently the conversation has kind of connected across regions. So that's been an interesting progression. But Freedom Hour Iran on Instagram, on Spotify, and it's live on every week. And I'll be talking about it more tomorrow as well. And we'd love to have anybody really to talk to about it at any point, just because I think it's something that's been missing. So thank you guys for listening.
Shirin has a great show, by the way. I've listened to several episodes, and I was fortunate enough to find her on Instagram. And thank you for taking time to come onto the panel, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation tomorrow.
Thankful for you guys. Thank you.
Last but not least is Audra.
Okay, so we're ending this how we started it. Yeah, so I'm found, if you just search engine me, there's not too many Audra Whites in the world. And I'm mostly found these days on Substack, where I am writing a blog to book format and trying to compete against the Amazon model, because I want to publish my book, but I refuse to do it to any platform that then feeds into the Amazon model. Not that I have a problem with the Amazon model. I just think it should just move to a unionized co-op. So could that exist? Could conscious capitalism exist anywhere? So anyway, I use Substack now. That's probably the easiest place, but I still use my Instagram account where I'm collaborating with the Anti-Capitalist Network podcasters, and I'm over on Blue Sky, where I'm very well connected with a lot of different global resistors, which I did nothing to attract this audience. I've just found a whole bunch of people that found me on Twitter and started tagging me in all of these Let's Go Blue campaigns back in 2020. And all of a sudden I had 1,000 followers on Twitter that were all these resistors, most of them Democrats, but a lot of progressives as well. So I'm finding them now on Blue Sky, which I would highly promote that platform to join with other people. And the other platform that I would promote is Reddit, because there's lots of streams coming up now on Reddit where the millennials' voices are heard. And it's a lot of conversations about the collapse, a revolution. It's hardcore, really anonymous comments, because it's not like Facebook where you can look at somebody's profile. So engaging in these online forums is really smart, but keep it at a controlled medium, which is also covered in my book, where I talk about let's reform our digital habits and start to plug out and touch more earth. And breathe.
It's fantastic. She's also great at keeping things chill, even though we talk about heavy things all the time with her yoga perspective. So I always appreciate that. We could probably just do an entire podcast about the concept of yoga and its, I guess, role in the revolution too. So I'll get back to you on that.
Oh my gosh. And I have got the instructors behind that, and they are all over the world from different nationalities. Yeah, once I lose weight, my hair grows back, I'm feeling better, I'm out of my winter depression, then it's over for these tech oligarchs, because I'm bringing in all of the yoga instructors that I know, which is a huge network across the globe, and we're coming in packing with our yoga mats.
Oh, you had me at all your other points, and now you're talking about destroying Silicon Valley. Let's fucking go.
Yes, that's what I want to happen.
And bring it on.
As always, the 805 Uncensored is on all the major social media and podcasting platforms. If you have any comments, questions, guest suggestions, or episode ideas, or panels just like this, please DM us. We would love to hear from you. Hope everybody has a great night, morning, evening, wherever you're listening in the world. Stay safe out there. Free Palestine, and the revolution is you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Ciao.